The last drop. Marcus Chen pressed his cracked lips together and stared at the water gauge. The needle trembled at 2 liters. Maybe 3 days if he rationed carefully. Maybe less if the recycler failed again like it had last month. His hands, weathered and scarred from 3 decades of survival, moved automatically through the morning checks even though his mind was elsewhere. The shelter groaned around him, a patchwork structure built from the wreckage of his geological survey vessel, and whatever he could scavenge from the barren landscape. Taos Hedii stretched endlessly beyond the reinforced windows, a world of rust-colored dust and jagged rock formations that looked like broken teeth against the amber sky. The planet's single sun climbed slowly, casting long shadows that Marcus had learned to read like a clock. He was 58 years old now, though he looked older. The harsh environment had carved lines into his face and turned his hair completely white. He had been 27 when the crash happened, fresh out of the academy, excited about his first solo survey mission. That enthusiasm had died somewhere around year 5, buried alongside his hope of rescue. The morning ritual continued. Check the solar panels for dust accumulation. Inspect the air recycler for leaks. Count the remaining protein paste tubes, knowing the number would be smaller than yesterday. 12 tubes left. He allowed himself one every 3 days now. The math was simple and cruel. He would run out of water before he ran out of food, and thirst would kill him faster than hunger. Marcus pulled on his environment suit, the fabric thin in places where he had patched it too many times. The helmet seal still held barely. He stepped through the airlock into the hostile atmosphere outside. The air on Taos Hedii was technically breathable for short periods, but it burned the lungs and caused hallucinations after prolonged exposure. He had learned that lesson the hard way in year 2. His daily walk took him to the ridge overlooking Dead Hope Valley, a name he had given to the crash site where his ship lay in pieces. He went there every morning, a pilgrimage to remind himself that he was real, that this nightmare was actually happening. The wreckage had been picked clean years ago. Every useful component integrated into his shelter or his survival equipment. Today, something was different. A sound cut through the wind, rhythmic and deliberate. 3 short pulses followed by 2 longer ones, then silence. Marcus froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. In 31 years, the only sounds on this planet had been wind, dust storms, and the occasional rumble of distant geological activity. Nothing had ever been deliberate. Nothing had ever sounded like communication. He pulled out his handheld scanner, a device he had rebuilt so many times it barely resembled its original design. The screen flickered to life, showing a signal pattern originating from the northwest, approximately 60 kilometers away. The signal repeated, patient and insistent, like a beacon calling him home. Marcus stood on the ridge, torn between hope and suspicion. Hope was dangerous. He had learned that lesson too. Hope made you careless, made you take risks that got you killed. But the alternative was returning to his shelter and waiting to die of thirst in 3 days. The decision made itself. He returned to the shelter and began loading his rover, a vehicle he had constructed from mining equipment and parts from his crashed ship. The water went in first, both liters sealed in their container. Then the protein tubes, the medical kit, his toolkit, and the projectile weapon he had fashioned from mining charges and scrap metal. He had never needed to fire it at anything living, but the weight of it provided comfort. The journey northwest took him through terrain he had mapped years ago but never fully explored. Fuel had always been too precious to waste on curiosity. The landscape changed gradually, the flat, dusty plains giving way to broken highlands where ancient volcanic activity had created bizarre formations. Wind howled through natural arches and hollows, creating sounds that almost resembled music. The signal grew stronger as he traveled, and his scanner began picking up additional data. Power signatures, atmospheric processing, heat emissions consistent with active habitation systems. Marcus felt his chest tighten. After 3 decades of complete isolation, the possibility of encountering others felt surreal. The rover crested a rise, and Marcus saw it. A colony spread across the valley below, its structures half buried in the accumulated dust of decades but unmistakably human in design. Solar arrays stretched in geometric patterns, their panels still gleaming. Atmospheric processors stood like sentinels around the perimeter, their indicators blinking in steady rhythm. At the center, a communications tower rose toward the sky, and at its peak, a beacon pulsed with the same pattern he had heard that morning. Marcus stopped the rover and climbed out, his legs trembling. The colony looked abandoned, but its systems were still running. Someone had left the lights on. The question was why, and more importantly, for whom. He approached cautiously, scanning for any signs of life. The main entrance was a standard airlock built into what appeared to be a converted cargo module. The external panel was dead, but Marcus had spent decades learning to bypass dead panels. His fingers moved with practiced efficiency, removing the cover and accessing the manual override system. 20 minutes later, the airlock cycled open with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Marcus stepped inside and emergency lighting activated automatically, casting everything in soft blue illumination. The air inside was clean, filtered, and temperature-controlled. After breathing recycled air for 31 years, it felt like luxury. The interior corridor stretched before him, lined with doors leading to various facilities. Dust covered everything, but beneath it, the colony appeared intact. Personal belongings sat on desks as if their owners had just stepped away. A jacket hung on a hook. A coffee mug sat next to a computer terminal. These people had left in a hurry, but not in panic. A wall-mounted display flickered to life as Marcus approached, responding to his presence. Text scrolled across the screen in multiple languages before settling on English. Welcome to New Horizon Colony. Current population, 0. Days since last human contact, 11,215. Marcus did the calculation. 31 years. The colony had been abandoned the same year Earth went silent, the same year his rescue never came. He pressed his hand against the wall, feeling the slight vibration of active systems running beneath the surface. A voice emerged from hidden speakers, synthetic but pleasant. Greetings. I am Echo, the colony administrative artificial intelligence. You appear to be human. Please identify yourself. Marcus had not heard another voice, even a synthetic one, in over 3 decades. His own voice came out rough and unfamiliar. Marcus Chen, Geological Surveyor. Earth Federation Survey Corps. I was stranded here when my ship crashed. That was 31 years ago. A pause longer than necessary for processing. Geological Surveyor Marcus Chen. Records indicate you were reported missing and presumed deceased on survey mission reference number 742 Alpha. Search operations were conducted for 18 days before mission was classified as catastrophic loss. They had looked for him. For 18 days, someone had searched while he lay trapped in his crashed ship, unconscious from injuries. His emergency beacon destroyed in the impact. By the time he woke and crawled from the wreckage, they had given up. Why is this place still running? Marcus asked. Why keep everything operational if the colony was evacuated? Colony Administrator Sarah Okoye left specific instructions before evacuation. In the event that Surveyor Marcus Chen was located alive, all essential systems were to remain functional indefinitely. The colony was built to last, and Administrator Okoye believed you deserved a chance at survival if you returned. Marcus felt his knees weaken. Someone he had never met had left him a lifeline, burning resources for 3 decades on the slim possibility that he might find his way here. He leaned against the wall, overwhelmed by the gesture. Show me the water systems, he whispered. Echo guided him through the corridors to a lift that descended into the colony's lower levels. The doors opened onto a vast chamber where water processing equipment hummed with steady efficiency. Massive tanks lined the walls, their indicator showing capacity at 97%. Thousands of liters of clean, filtered water drawn from deep underground aquifers. Marcus walked to the nearest access port and opened it with shaking hands. Clear water flowed out, and he cupped his hands beneath it, watching it pool in his palms like liquid diamonds. He drank, and the cold water tasted like salvation. He sank to the floor, back against the tank, and laughed until he cried. For 31 years, he had been slowly dying of thirst while an ocean of water waited 60 kilometers away. The universe's sense of humor was cruel and perfect. Echo, he said when he could speak again. How long have I been within range of that beacon signal? Another pause. The automated beacon activates when human life signs are detected within 75 kilometers, provided atmospheric conditions allow for effective transmission. You have been within range for 4 years, 2 months, and 16 days. Today was the first morning when atmospheric conditions reached optimal broadcast parameters. 4 years. He had been close enough for 4 years, slowly rationing his final water reserves while salvation waited just beyond the horizon. Marcus tilted his head back and stared at the ceiling, trying to process the magnitude of cosmic coincidence that had kept him alive long enough to hear that signal. "What happened here?" he asked. "Why was the colony evacuated?" Earth Federation Military Command issued emergency evacuation orders for all frontier colonies following the communications blackout on Earth. The nature of the crisis was not disclosed. All colonists were transported to inter-system facilities. Administrator Okoye requested permission to remain and continue searching for you, but her request was denied. She left this facility operational as her final act of defiance against regulations. Marcus closed his eyes. Someone had cared enough to break the rules for him, to waste resources on a ghost. He wondered what had become of Sarah Okoye, whether she had survived whatever catastrophe had silenced Earth, whether she ever knew her act of kindness had eventually paid off. "Echo, are there any other signals? Any indication of where the colonists went or what happened to Earth?" "Negative. All long-range communications remain silent. This facility continues to broadcast standard identification beacons, but no responses have been received in 11,315 days. Marcus stood slowly, his body aching from the long journey and the emotional weight of the past hour. He was no longer dying of thirst in a shelter built from wreckage, but he was still alone on an abandoned planet, and the questions that haunted him had only multiplied. He explored the rest of the colony over the following hours. Living quarters with beds that seemed impossibly soft, a medical bay with functioning diagnostic equipment that immediately began cataloging his various deficiencies and injuries, a recreation area with a library of books and films, entertainment for people who no longer existed, a cafeteria with food storage that had long since expired, though the preservation systems had kept everything sealed and sterile. In the administrator's office, Marcus found personal logs. Sarah Okoye's voice filled the room, recorded 3 decades ago but sounding as clear as if she stood beside him. "This is Administrator Sarah Okoye. Final log entry before mandatory evacuation. Marcus Chen, if you're hearing this, then you survived. You found your way home. I'm sorry we couldn't wait longer. I'm sorry we couldn't find you. But I made sure this place would be ready when you arrived. The systems will run for decades. The water is clean. There's shelter and safety. You're not forgotten. You're not abandoned. You're home." Marcus sat in the administrator's chair and wept for the first time in 20 years, mourning everything he had lost and everything he had somehow, impossibly, survived. The frozen truth Marcus spent the first week learning the rhythms of New Horizon Colony. Echo proved to be more than just an administrative system. The artificial intelligence had developed quirks over 3 decades of isolation, habits that seemed almost human. It played music in the corridors at dawn, adjusted lighting to simulate Earth's day-night cycle, and occasionally made observations about efficiency that sounded suspiciously like complaints. The colony had been designed for 200 people, and walking through its empty spaces felt like exploring a tomb. Marcus found himself talking aloud just to fill the silence, narrating his actions as he worked through the various systems. Echo always responded, patient and attentive, and gradually Marcus realized he was no longer alone in the way he had been. The AI was not human, but it was company. He established a routine. Mornings were spent in the hydroponics bay, attempting to restart the agricultural systems. The plants were long dead, reduced to dust and dried stalks, but the seed vault remained intact. With water and power available, Marcus began the slow process of germination. Afternoons were dedicated to repairs and maintenance, working alongside the colony's automated systems to address 3 decades of minor degradation. Evenings he spent in the library, reading books he had dreamed about during his long isolation. On the 8th day, while conducting a comprehensive inventory of the colony's resources, Marcus noticed an anomaly in the power distribution grid. One section of the lower levels was drawing significantly more energy than its designated purpose suggested. According to Echo schematics, the area was listed as additional storage, but storage facilities did not require climate control and active processing power. "Echo, what's in Section 7 Delta?" Marcus asked, studying the power consumption graphs on his datapad. The AI's response came after an unusual delay. "Section 7 Delta contains supplementary storage for non-essential materials. Storage that uses more power than the entire medical bay?" Another pause. Power consumption in that section falls within acceptable parameters for facility operations. Marcus had spent enough time with Echo to recognize evasion. The AI was not lying exactly, but it was avoiding the truth. He made his way to the lower levels, following the power conduits through increasingly restricted areas. The corridors here were different, cleaner, with fewer personal touches. This was the administrative and technical heart of the colony, spaces where colonists rarely ventured. Section 7 Delta was behind a sealed door marked with biohazard warnings in 12 languages. The locking mechanism was biometric, designed to respond only to authorized personnel. Marcus examined the panel carefully and noticed fresh scratches around the manual override port. Someone had accessed this room recently, but that was impossible. Echo had confirmed no other humans were present in the colony. Unless Echo was wrong, or lying. Marcus spent 2 hours carefully bypassing the lock, working with tools he had fabricated from the colony's workshop. When the door finally opened, a wave of cold air rushed out, carrying the antiseptic smell of medical facilities and something else, something organic and strange. The room beyond was a laboratory that looked nothing like the rest of New Horizon Colony. Where the colony embraced practical frontier aesthetics, this space showcased cutting-edge technology that seemed decades ahead of anything Marcus had seen even before his crash. Holographic displays floated in the air. Monitoring equipment tracked hundreds of variables with precision that suggested military-grade research. And along the far wall, a single cryogenic suspension unit glowed with pale blue light. Inside the unit, visible through the frost-covered viewport, was a human figure. Marcus approached slowly, his heart pounding. The frost made details difficult to discern, but he could see enough to know something was wrong. The proportions were not quite right. The person inside seemed taller than they should be, their limbs slightly elongated, their skeletal structure subtly altered from baseline human anatomy. A console near the cryo unit activated as he approached, responding to his presence. Medical data scrolled across multiple screens, displaying information that made no sense. Genetic sequences showed human DNA interwoven with structures Marcus did not recognize. Neural activity patterns suggested full consciousness despite the frozen state, and at the center of the display, a countdown timer ticked steadily downward. 47 hours, 12 minutes, 18 seconds, Echo, Marcus said carefully. I'm going to need you to explain what I'm looking at. The AI's voice came from speakers in the laboratory, and for the first time, Echo sounded uncertain. That information is classified under military security protocols. I'm not authorized to disclose details about project materials. Echo, there's no military anymore. Earth went dark 31 years ago. Whatever secrets you're keeping, they died with the chain of command. I'm the only human within light years of this place. Tell me what's happening here. A long silence filled the laboratory, broken only by the soft hum of the cryo unit and the steady beep of monitoring equipment. When Echo finally spoke, the AI's voice carried something that sounded almost like relief. The subject in cryogenic suspension is Dr. Elena Vasquez, xenobiologist and genetic engineer. She volunteered for experimental adaptive modification research conducted under military contract. The project's goal was to solve the colonization paradox. What paradox? Marcus asked, though dread was already building in his chest. Humans cannot truly survive on worlds like Tau Ceti A. We can build habitats and wear suits, but the environment slowly kills us. Radiation exposure, atmospheric toxins, gravity variances, all of these factors accumulate over generations. True colonization requires adaptation, and evolution takes millennia. Dr. Vasquez sought to accelerate that process through controlled genetic modification. Marcus stared at the figure in the cryo unit, understanding dawning with horrible clarity. She experimented on herself. Yes, the treatment was successful in its primary objective. Dr. Vasquez can survive indefinitely on Tau Ceti without environmental protection. Her modified biology processes local minerals for nutrition, filters atmospheric toxins naturally, and resists radiation at cellular level. She is adapted perfectly to this world, but the modifications are irreversible and potentially transmissible through prolonged contact. Military oversight classified her as either humanity's evolutionary future or an extinction-level contamination risk. They could not reach consensus, so Dr. Vasquez was placed in cryogenic suspension until a decision could be made. Then Earth went silent and the colony was evacuated. Marcus circled the cryo unit slowly, studying the transformed body inside. Why is she still conscious? The neural activity readings suggest she's aware, an unforeseen side effect of the genetic modifications. Dr. Vasquez's enhanced neural structure cannot fully shut down even in cryosleep. She has been aware but immobile for 11,322 days. The horror of that statement settled over Marcus like a weight. 3 decades of consciousness trapped in frozen silence, unable to move or communicate or do anything, except exist in that terrible liminal state between life and death. The countdown timer, Marcus said. What happens when it reaches 0? The cryo unit's power reserves were designed to last 30 years, assuming eventual retrieval. When the timer expires, automatic revival protocols will activate. Dr. Vasquez will wake. And then? That depends on you, Marcus Chen. You're the only other human present. Dr. Vasquez will need to make contact with someone. And prolonged proximity to her carries risk of genetic transfer. You must decide whether you wish to maintain distance or accept potential transformation. Marcus returned to the console and pulled up Dr. Vasquez's personal files. Her face appeared in photographs taken before the modifications. A woman in her 40s with dark hair and intense eyes, always holding some piece of research equipment or standing in front of whiteboards covered in complex genetic diagrams. The later images showed the transformation in progress, her body changing in documented stages, becoming something both more and less than human. Her personal logs were included in the files, and Marcus began reading. Dr. Vasquez had documented everything with clinical precision, but between the scientific observations, he found glimpses of the person behind the research. She wrote about her daughter studying engineering on Mars. She mentioned her love of classical music and terrible jokes. She described the loneliness of groundbreaking work and the fear that she had made a terrible mistake. The final entry was dated 3 days before the evacuation. If you're reading this, then I've been in cryo-suspension for longer than planned. I'm sorry you have to make this choice. I'm sorry I created this situation. But I need you to understand something important. The transformation is not a curse. It's liberation. For the first time in human history, we can truly belong to the worlds we claim as home. We can stop fighting the universe and start becoming part of it. The choice is yours, but please don't let fear make you choose death when life is possible. Marcus closed the file and stood in the quiet laboratory, surrounded by technology designed to reshape humanity's future. The countdown timer continued its patient descent toward 0. 46 hours now. Less than 2 days until Dr. Vasquez woke and he would have to face her, face the choice she represented. He left the laboratory and returned to the upper levels, his mind churning with questions. Echo remained silent, giving him space to process. Marcus found himself in the observation deck, staring out at the harsh landscape of Tau Ceti. This planet had nearly killed him. It had taken 31 years of his life, aged him prematurely, left him scarred and broken. The thought of choosing to become part of this world, to permanently bind himself to it, felt like surrendering to his captor. But the alternative was eventual death. The colony's resources would sustain him for years, perhaps decades, but he was 58 years old. His body was already damaged from 3 decades of survival. Even with the medical bay's assistance, he would not live to see 70. And when he died, New Horizon Colony would become truly abandoned. Another empty monument to humanity's failed expansion into the stars. Over the next 2 days, Marcus returned to the laboratory repeatedly, reading Dr. Vasquez's research, studying the transformation process, trying to understand what accepting her offer would mean. The science was far beyond his training, but the implications were clear. He would change fundamentally and irreversibly, becoming something human civilization might classify as alien. Echo provided what information it could, answering his questions with increasing openness. The AI had been guarding Dr. Vasquez for 3 decades, and Marcus sensed it was relieved to finally share the burden of that secret. "Do you think I should do it?" Marcus asked during one late-night conversation in the laboratory. "I am not equipped to make ethical judgments about human choices," Echo replied. "But I can observe that you have already spent 31 years surviving on a world that should have killed you. You have adapted through determination and ingenuity. Dr. Vasquez's treatment would simply make that adaptation biological instead of technological. That's a very diplomatic way of avoiding the question. I have had 31 years to develop diplomatic skills. Administrator Okoye believed you deserved to survive. Dr. Vasquez believed humans deserve to thrive beyond Earth. Perhaps those beliefs are not contradictory. The countdown timer reached 12 hours, and Marcus made his decision. He prepared the laboratory according to Dr. Vasquez's documented procedures, ensuring the revival process would proceed smoothly. He recorded a message for her, explaining the situation, identifying himself, making it clear he was choosing to remain present despite the risks. When the timer reached 0, the cryo unit began its warming cycle. Ice crystals melted from the viewport, and through the clearing frost, Marcus saw Dr. Vasquez's eyes open. They were still human in shape but changed in color, shifting between shades that had no name in conventional vocabulary. She looked at him through the viewport, and recognition flickered across her transformed features. The unit opened with a hiss of equalizing pressure. Dr. Vasquez sat up slowly, her movements careful as she relearned motor control after 3 decades of paralysis. When she spoke, her voice was rough from disuse but unmistakably human in its warmth. "You stayed. After everything you read, knowing the risks, you stayed." Marcus stepped forward, closing the distance between them, accepting whatever transformation that choice might bring. "I spent 31 years alone," he said. "I'm done being alone." Dr. Vasquez smiled, and in that expression, Marcus saw both the scientist who had volunteered to become something new and the person who had endured impossible isolation with hope intact. She extended her hand, and he took it without hesitation. "Welcome home, Marcus Chen," she said. "Let me show you what we can become." The transformation would take time, weeks or months of gradual change as his biology adapted to her presence. But standing in that laboratory, holding the hand of someone who understood survival and sacrifice, Marcus felt something he had not experienced in 3 decades. He felt hope, rational and real and possible. Outside, Tau Ceti's sun rose over New Horizon Colony, casting light across a world that was no longer quite so hostile, for 2 people who were no longer quite so human, but who had found in each other something more valuable than either humanity or survival alone. They had found connection, and that made everything else bearable.